All right, let's get right into it. We're going to tackle a question that really splits the car community right down the middle. Is that bottle of engine flush you see on the shelf a miracle cure for a dirty engine? Or is it basically a death sentence for your motor? It's a huge debate, so let's get our hands dirty and figure it out.
Just listen to that. That is the raw, unfiltered sound of a car owner seeing what's been hiding inside his engine for years. It's a moment of pure shock, and it perfectly sets the stage for what we're about to dig into. What on earth could make someone react like that?
Well, before we can even talk about the cure, we have to get a good look at the disease. And we are talking about a seriously nasty problem called engine sludge. It's the #1 enemy these flush products claim to destroy. And look, this isn't some theoretical problem. This is a real-world example. You pop the valve cover off this Toyota and wow, that is a horrifying sight. It's covered in this thick, baked-on, crusty gunk. This is literally what happens when oil changes get missed over and over again. So what is engine sludge exactly? Honestly, the best way to think of it is like cholesterol for your car's engine. It's this thick, tar-like goop that forms when motor oil just breaks down from heat and gets contaminated, and then it gets cooked again and again into this solid mess. And here's why it's so incredibly dangerous for your engine. That sludge doesn't just sit there looking ugly. It's actively doing damage. It can restrict or even completely block the tiny passages that oil needs to flow through. And when that happens, parts get starved of lubrication, which leads to terrible performance, overheating, and yeah, eventually total engine failure. Game over. So when you're staring at an engine full of that gunk, you can see why the idea of a quick fix is so tempting. And that's exactly the promise that companies like Liqui Moly and Amsoil are selling with their engine flush products. The sales pitch is pretty amazing, right? Just pour this bottle of, chemical magic into your old oil and it will dissolve years of that nasty sludge, varnish, and gum. Then you just drain it all away. It sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it? So how's it supposed to work in the real world? Let's walk through the actual process. How do you go from a sludged up mess to a sparkling clean engine in just a few minutes? The procedure is surprisingly simple and pretty much the same across all the brands. First, you get the engine nice and warm. Then you pour the whole bottle right into the old oil. Step 2 is the big one. You let the engine idle for about 10 to 15 minutes. And I mean idle. Do not, under any circumstances, drive the car. You gotta let those solvents do their thing gently. After that, you drain out the nasty black mixture, and this is non-negotiable. You have to put on a new oil filter. Finally, you just fill it up with fresh oil and you're done.
Okay, that all sounds easy enough. So why is this stuff so controversial? This is where we get to the very heart of the debate, and we have to talk about the very, very real risks.
Now this right here is the entire argument in a nutshell. An engine flush can be a totally fine, even good idea on a car you know has been taken care of. Say you're switching from conventional to synthetic oil and you want a clean slate. Perfect. But on a really old and neglected engine, the exact car that looks like it needs a flush the most, it's a massive gamble. And here's why. What if those powerful solvents break off a big chunk of that baked-on sludge all at once? If that chunk gets stuck in a narrow oil passage, it can starve your engine of oil and cause the exact catastrophic failure you were trying to prevent. And this quote from the owner of that sludged-up Toyota, it just perfectly captures that feeling of dread, doesn't it? You see the problem, and you feel like you have to do something, but the fix itself could be what kills the patient. It's a classic mechanic's nightmare. So, putting the promises and the terrifying risks aside for a second, does this stuff actually work? What happens when the rubber meets the road? Let's look at the evidence from a couple of real-world DIY tests. Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because the results are complicated. On one hand, the guy with the Toyota did 2 full flushes, and when he looked inside, he said it didn't really look any different. That super heavy caked-on gunk was still there. But then, in another test, a YouTuber named Owen Lucas found something fascinating. After doing the flush, he filled the engine with cheap oil, ran it for just a few minutes, and drained it again. And that second batch of oil came out obviously dirty. That's the proof. It shows the flush was still working, loosening up all that hidden grime that the first drain just couldn't grab. So that brings us to the big finale, the verdict. We've seen the problem, we've heard the promise, we understand the risks, and we've looked at the mixed results. So what's the final takeaway? Should you actually use an engine flush on your car?
Now, for anyone who decides, you know what, I'm going to go for it, especially on an engine that could really use a deep cleaning, there is an advanced, pro-level technique that came out of all this research. It's called the double flush.
The idea here is that you're actually flushing the flush. So after you do the chemical flush and drain it, you do a quick sacrificial oil change. We're talking cheap, conventional oil and a budget filter. You run the engine for just 10 more minutes, then you drain that oil out. This second drain is the secret sauce. It pulls out any leftover solvent and all that extra loosened up gunk. Then, and only then, do you do your final fill with your good, high-quality oil and a premium filter.
We also need to bust a couple of big myths that are floating around. First, no, you absolutely do not need to do a flush with every single oil change. If you're taking care of your car, it's completely unnecessary. And second, and this is the big one, it is not a guaranteed fix for a badly neglected engine. As we've seen, that's actually the scenario where it's the most dangerous.
So here's the bottom line. Engine flush is not snake oil. It definitely works. It's a powerful chemical cleaner. But, and this is a huge but, it is not for every engine. You have to think of it as a specialized tool for a very specific job. It's best used on a well-maintained engine, maybe when you're switching oil types, but it's a high-risk tool on an old, sludgy engine where it could actually cause more harm than good. The risk and the reward depend completely on what's already hiding under your valve cover.
And that leaves us with one last question for you to think about. In the fight against engine sludge, is a chemical flush a necessary, tactical deep clean for certain situations? Or is the best, the safest, and the most effective flush you can ever perform just doing your next scheduled oil change on time every single time?